Canada is not for sale. That's what Prime Minister Mark Carney told Donald Trump to his face in Washington this week.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale. Ever.
He made headlines with the bold statement, sure. But beyond the viral moments, this historic meeting with the US president, Mark Carney's first since being elected prime minister, was a high-wire diplomatic act and has real consequences for Canada's economy, for trade, for sovereignty, and of course the Liberals' core political mandate that helped them win, arguably. So what really happened in that room? The Star's Ottawa Bureau Chief Tonda MacCharles was there, and she's here now to give us insight into the strategy and the stakes. Hi, Tonda.
Hi, Saba.
So let's talk a little bit BDS, behind the scenes first. Talk about some observations or anything that kind of stood out to you that didn't make it into your article that you want to share.
Look, the scene in the Oval Office was quite amazing. I mean, there are 42 press that are brought in, mostly American pool people and Canadian pool, much of our delegation, in fact, Secret Service. And then there was an array of cabinet ministers on both sides, the US and Canadian side, with senior staff standing behind. And, the little things in the room that, there's a tension there because the Secret Service is very, controlling of the access and how close people can get. So are the White House wranglers. But the ministers on both sides, I was looking to see who's sitting back and comfortable here and who's on the edge of their seat. All the Canadians were kind of up at the edge of their seat. One of the Canadian officials was nodding as Trump's speaking about the things they might have in common. And on the other side, the Americans, I was watching J.D. Vance was the one who was most relaxed, sitting back with his legs crossed. But Lutnick up front looking at, and Marco Rubio, kind of everybody's moved forward and in this sort of alert, vigilant posture. And then the scene unfolds. And I mean, Mark Carney's face was just full of all these expressions and, slight, but, he clearly was kind of holding back. And at a certain point, then he would try to interject. It's funny, there was a feeling of somewhat a tension and alertness in the room. And yet outside and after it was all over, all sides kind of, it seemed to me, exhaled and thought, well, that went pretty well. There was no major clash. There was some tensions. There was a back and forth. But Mr. Carney really only spoke about 3 times from what I could tell, from what I remember. And it was pretty much the Donald Trump show, as it always is. And as it must be.
That's what I was going to ask you about. In fact, Prime Minister Carney said during the press somewhere, I am on the edge of my seat.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm on the edge of my seat, actually.
He was, trying to say some things. What were some of the key points that he was trying to land? Do you think he managed to do that? Did he manage to get a word in edgewise beyond the viral moments?
I mean, he made his, I suppose, 3 interventions count for getting across the message that Canada is not for sale and stating at least twice that Canada's not ever going to be a 51st state. He also attempted to make the argument that his government was interested in increasing its defense spending, had worked on the border, would join with Trump on those efforts, praised Trump for revitalizing NATO and security efforts. So, but that stuff was in a much sort of quieter and quick kind of messaging from the prime minister. I think he had a better chance to make those points in private. And that's what we understood from the senior officials who afterwards all said the meetings went well, that the president asked Carney's opinion on a bunch of world events, discussions around China, Russia, Iran, the Middle East, although that seemed to be a much more minor point of discussion. So I think a lot happened behind the scenes in the working lunch, which was, again, with the 2 leaders and their ministers and senior staff, and in the one-on-one. There was about 75 minutes sit down, just Trump and Carney, and I mean, I imagine there was a note taker from each side in the room as well. But that seemed to be what gave Carney the impetus to come out and tell us the president absolutely agreed to renegotiate a deal in which we expect tariffs will come off. But when I pressed him about where actually did he say that? Like, because we heard a whole bunch of contradictory things in the Oval Office on this. It wasn't clear to me. I think that he emerged from the meetings feeling more confident that there is a path ahead.
Mm-hmm. And you're talking to the body language and the optics and the vibe basically of the room. It seems that the US side had the usual sort of like tendency to try and dominate. But how did things differ when it comes to Trump's interactions in the past with a former Canadian leadership, like former Prime Minister Trudeau? Was there quite a distinct difference there? I know that the Associated Press went so far as to call him as radiating warmth, like he radiated warmth. Did you feel the warmth?
Well, I mean, interesting to me, the American press seemed to take it as a much warmer reception by Trump to the Canadian leader than he has had with a number of visiting foreign leaders in this second term. I attended Justin Trudeau's trips to Washington, meeting with Trump in his first term. And I was in the Oval Office for both those meetings. And I saw that dynamic in the room again and at one of their joint news conferences. And I can't say that there was a very big difference because even, believe it or not, though Trump said yesterday that he disliked Trudeau in the end,
Yeah.
their encounters were also publicly, at least, not antagonistic, not challenging. They were friendly. But this is a different president at a different point in his political career, in his second term, surrounded by a more hawkish group of ministers. He himself is more aggressively asserting the U.S. claim to all kinds of things, including chunks of international trade and potentially territory in Greenland, Panama, and maybe Canada, who knows? Although he said, he acknowledged it takes two to tango in that. But it's interesting that within his second term, that people are noticing that, he didn't disdain openly the Canadian Prime Minister. They avoided a clash, that Trump allowed him to speak, gave him some, I guess, margins where he said, 51st state, it takes two to tango, but never say never. Like he always got the last word in. So hard to read some of that, but I go by what my colleagues have said and who've watched him intimately on 30 other, I think there were some, anyway, there have been a couple of dozen people who have traipsed through the White House since Trump came back to power. And, he hasn't done joint avails with many of them, only a few, including the UK Prime Minister. And Carney didn't do a joint news conference with him formally, but yeah, it seemed like Trump was willing to hear him out, put it that way.
Beyond what we were seeing in front of the cameras and the viral moments, did we get anything out of it? This visit was basically framed around, defending Canadian sovereignty, finding some leeway with the tariffs and the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, which might be up for renewal. And that's been the core campaign promise of PM Carney as well, right? That he's the best man to deal with Trump on that. So did he make good on that in your view?
Well, it remains to be seen. Mr. Carney told us yesterday at the closing news conference that there will be steps now in the days and weeks ahead, that Mr. Trump is coming to the G7 Leaders Summit in Kananaskis, Alberta in June, and that in the meantime, their officials will begin the process of talking about how do we move on from this. Look, he says that he wasn't expecting that tariffs would have been lifted yesterday. And I think most of the stakeholders I talked to before the meeting also didn't expect that. But some of them, there's a difference. Some of them come away feeling like Trump's not going to move. He said he wasn't going to move. He wasn't looking for concessions. When I asked the officials, did he ask something specifically of Canada in order for that to happen? No, he did not, they told me. So what are the steps ahead? What does the days ahead look like? Is there a renegotiation about to start? We don't know. The Business Council of Canada, the head of that organization, Goldie Hyder, has urged Mr. Carney to bring Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, to the G7 summit on the sidelines and reopen negotiations on a legal document, that on a legal free trade deal that Trump signed in the first place in 2018, and now wants to possibly either terminate. If you heard him yesterday say it could be terminated, it could be renegotiated, it could be
Yeah.
renewed. I'm not sure it's necessary.
Yeah.
Maybe he's looking for bilateral deals only. Maybe he wants to cut a deal separately with Canada and Mexico. We just don't know. A lot of those questions are the ones we have to pursue.
So it seemed that he didn't say anything. It was sort of non-committal from his side, but it did seem from Prime Minister Carney's presser later that there might have been some agreement on this front or some preliminary agreements. Did you get that sense?
Well, that's what he answered to my question, but I've asked them to point to where Mr. Trump said that to Mr.
Yeah.
Carney, and I expected it was he gave a clearer indication in the private meetings. To this point, as we're recording this at midday on Wednesday, I don't specifically know. I can't point to exactly where they said that and what's going to happen, but they seem confident. And so now I guess now they have to set up an actual action plan. Who meets and when. And I think that the Canadian ministers and officials might want to start that. But honestly, the ones who were in those positions yesterday in the room may not be the ones in those same positions next week when Mr. Carney strikes a new cabinet.
Was there anything in the meeting or the press availability that you feel maybe didn't make the headlines but caught your attention? Anything comes to mind?
It's funny because when the cameras go off and the wranglers are ushering everyone out of the room, you kind of then look and see what's going on and what's the body language, and they actually did. Both of them seem to be content, relieved, somewhat smiling, laughing. I'm shouting out, still trying to get Mr. Trump, to answer a question on NATO spending and Canada border security, and he's grinning, and I grinned back at him, and then my colleague on the other side of the room said, did this go better than with the last prime minister? And Trump grinned. Yeah, I like this guy, So it's funny. They came away from it. It seemed like once the press got out of the room, so did the tension.
Right. And how has the Canadian public responded? I know it's really soon, but what's been the initial reaction to Prime Minister Carney's handling of this meeting? I've been seeing TikTok, and it's quite a flutter with praise for Carney and how they call it reverse psychology Trump. What do you think?
I mean, I've seen a range of reaction, to be honest. I've seen both a lot of business reactions saying, it's the start of it's a new beginning of a relationship. It's a reset. I've seen sectoral representatives on the steel and aluminum side actually wonder, will the tariffs ever be lifted off their sectors? They know his ultimate goal is to bring that manufacturing back to the States. To be honest, I am a bit surprised the extent to which the reaction was so positive, given that there was no concrete takeaway. Given that we did not hear Trump publicly either say anything that he wants of Canada, that he will change his mind on tariffs, or that he is going to absolutely strike a new deal. In public, he didn't say that to us. So the reaction has been, I would say, sort of, from what I can tell, more positive than I expected it would be, given what we witnessed publicly. Mm-hmm. But I don't rule out that privately there was a whole other thing going on.
No concrete takeaway as such. That was going to be my last question as well. What's your main takeaway from observing closely and reporting on this in terms of looking ahead for the future of Canada's most important bilateral relationship and Canada's diplomatic strategy towards the U.S.? What do you see?
Look, even if those ministers who were on the Canadian side of the couches aren't in those roles next week, which some of them maybe, some of them won't, but on the US side, I saw none of them, like, they're all listening very carefully to what Trump says and where he wants to go. And they'll carry out his marching orders no matter what. Mm-hmm. That's what it felt like. So I think much depends on, Trump's willingness to now engage diplomatically. That will give everybody their marching orders. Doesn't matter how much Carney wants to both strike a new deal or diversify trade or what have you. It very much depends on Mr. Trump. He's the decision maker. And he certainly didn't, back off his 51st state talk. So whether that antagonizes things in the days ahead and the months ahead, we'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Tonda, for your time. I know you've been very busy. We'll keep looking to your reporting on this.
Thanks, Saba.
And that's all we have, but you can follow Tonda's cohesive reporting and analysis on thestar.com, of course, and consider subscribing to The Star and support our journalism. And of course, stay tuned to This Matters wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Sabai Tazaz. Thank you for watching.